John, for vSAN networking, of course, we have a lot of different failover methods that you can configure within vSphere. What should they choose for vSAN?
So the default when you use a standard switch or a VDS is virtual port ID, which sounds kind of confusing, but what that basically does is it pseudo randomly throws different traffic classes or even individual VMs down different paths. And so you've got kind of a randomness to that. Now you can turn that into kind of an active standby design to where it prefers one path over the other by migrating one of those two ports from both being active to one being on a standby configuration. Do know, just because you have them both active and you have virtual port ID set doesn't mean you're actively using both. It just means it could use one or the other from that, from where it throws its connections. Now, there are some kind of different philosophies of this design. The active standby, one of the benefits of this design is if I'm using a pair of 25 gig connections to a pair of switches, and let's say I want to just put my vSAN and my vMotion traffic on them, I might go active for vSAN down one path and then standby down the other, and then do the opposite, do vMotion active down one path and standby down the other, and make sure that VLAN's trunked between the two switches. And so in this case, by default, all traffic would stay local to one switch. And so that would keep the latency and just the opportunity for contention at its lowest in this case, while still providing resiliency and failover. The other kind of methods that you can use are you can do things like LECP, and lag, and use a lag if you're using a VDS. This is chosen by a very minority of customers. I'd say less than 10% of customers build this. This is, kind of its own can of worms. I'll do its own video on. And then the third option, which is the default for VMware Cloud Foundation, is load-based teaming. This is route-based on physical port load. And so what this does is it's like virtual port ID, and that stuff by default picks a path. But if there's contention on a port for an extended amount of time, so every 45 seconds or so, if it notices that one of the ports is getting kind of full, it's going to go reshuffle and chunk traffic to the other path. This has kind of some of the benefits of a lag or LECP, in that it helps balance and try to use both ports in a way without requiring any switch configuration. What's nice about this option. So while your lag or LECP would require switch configuration, this lets you try to get the most of both paths without it. The only downside to this versus, say, an active standby, it's if you're ever trying to go back and look at, I had a performance issue that happened yesterday at 7 p.m. Which path was which path was vSAN or vMotion traffic going down? I don't know. You're going to have to go correlate some log messages. That's going to make troubleshooting a little more complicated. Typically, more reserved customers I tend to see do active standby. Anyone who's VCF is just using load-based teaming because that's how it's configured. And VxRail customers use active standby. So there's kind of different options here.
Sure, and it sounds like then of those options, active standby would really be the simplest and the most appropriate then for most of our customers.
It's boring, but it works.